Imagine discovering a mysterious hole behind your bathroom mirror. It leads to an abandoned apartment next door. What begins as a strange curiosity soon turns into something much darker, a tale that captivates viewers and sends chills down your spine. But what if this bizarre discovery wasn't just a coincidence? What if it mirrored a real-life nightmare, a haunting tragedy that has remained hidden in the shadows for decades? This is the story of Ruthie Mae McCoy, a woman whose life was shattered by a break-in through a bathroom mirror, a crime that went unnoticed by those who should have intervened. Tonight, we'll uncover the chilling truth behind Ruthie's story, a story of neglect, horror, and the forgotten victims of a broken system. Stay with us as we reveal the untold tale that inspired one of the most terrifying urban legends of our time. In March 2020, a viral TikTok unleashed a new source of nightmare fuel upon the world, or at the very least, apartment-dwelling netizens. Samantha Hartsoe, the TikTok's original poster, discovered a large hole behind her bathroom mirror. To further add to the mystery, the hole led to the abandoned apartment next door. The 4-part series followed Hartsoe through the various stages of her investigation and provided gripping viewing for an audience grown increasingly stir-crazy from pandemic-related restrictions. It also conjured comparisons to Candyman, the 1992 horror film about a supernatural killer that haunts the projects of Chicago. In one scene, the movie's heroine climbs through a hole behind a bathroom mirror and finds the titular Candyman's lair. But savvy true crime aficionados might recall the real-life case that served as the inspiration for Candyman, the murder of Ruthie Mae McCoy. Who was Ruthie Mae McCoy? Ruthie Mae McCoy was a living example of how our institutions fail the marginalized and underprivileged. A black woman who grew up on Chicago's South Side, she began exhibiting symptoms of mental illness in her 20s. Despite the consensus that McCoy was mentally ill, those close to her weren't able to identify her condition, only that she would talk to herself or curse at strangers on the street, suddenly and unpredictably. She would later be diagnosed with residual-type schizophrenia, a diagnosis that arises when someone has experienced schizophrenic episodes in the past, but is not currently exhibiting symptoms. When she was in the throes of mental illness, it affected McCoy's ability to hold down a steady job. She was never able to maintain employment for longer than a month. To make matters more difficult, she was institutionalized several times throughout her life. Eventually, in 1983, McCoy would find herself living in ABLA homes, public housing which was coincidentally located near Cabrini Green, the setting for 1992's Candyman. Despite her circumstances, there was evidence of McCoy taking steps to leave the projects in the months before her murder in 1987. McCoy had received approval for Supplemental Security Income (SSI). Not only did this double the monthly monetary assistance she received, SSI paid retroactively to the date of application. This meant that McCoy's first check was nearly $2,000, a hefty sum of money for someone struggling with poverty in the 80s. McCoy intended to use the check to help her leave ABLA homes, but she also used some of the money to buy new clothes and a few household items. It wasn't extravagant spending by any stretch of the imagination, but the acquisitions would have drawn notice. Whoever killed McCoy likely targeted her because they believed she had a large sum of money stashed in her apartment. On the evening of April 22, 1987, the Chicago PD received a phone call from McCoy. The frantic call confused the dispatcher. Recordings showed that McCoy told them that people threw the cabinet down and were coming through the bathroom. While today we know this meant that attackers were breaking in via the bathroom medicine cabinet, the dispatcher didn't immediately make the connection. Despite the confusion, a police car was sent in response to the call. What followed was a bewildering display of negligence. Unfortunately, the dispatcher didn't note down McCoy's call as a break-in. It was recorded as a disturbance. Perhaps the misreporting can explain the lack of urgency on the part of the officer sent to ABLA Homes. Before the car even arrived, the Chicago PD received more 911 calls from neighbors reporting that they heard gunshots and shouting. Several officers eventually arrived at McCoy's home, but when they knocked on her door, no one answered. A couple officers went to Abla Homes' management office to retrieve the key to her apartment, but for unknown reasons, it didn't fit the door's lock. Given McCoy's frantic phone call and the follow-up reports from neighbors, you would think the officers on the scene would attempt to overcome these setbacks. Instead, they left. The next evening, Chicago PD would receive another phone call from another of McCoy's neighbors. The neighbor told police that McCoy normally greeted her twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, but she hadn't seen the other woman since the day before. Several police officers returned to McCoy's apartment. Once again, they knocked on McCoy's door. Once again, their calls went unanswered, and once again, instead of ascertaining McCoy's welfare, they simply left. Deborah Lastly, the neighbor who regularly saw McCoy, was not deterred. Seeing that the police would be of no help, she contacted the management office. The office sent a couple people to McCoy's apartment, who finally got the door open. There, they came upon a grisly scene. Ruthie Mae McCoy was found in her bedroom, shot multiple times and lying in a pool of blood. The room had been ransacked, and because it had been a couple days since the break-in had happened, the smell of decomposition had begun to pervade the apartment. Unfortunately, crimes committed in Chicago's public housing projects rarely garnered widespread media coverage, especially when the victim was a mentally ill black woman. In fact, the only reason the McCoy murder case made the Chicago Tribune as a news brief was because detectives learned that the killers had entered the home from the adjacent apartment by breaking through the bathroom's medicine cabinet. The mode of entry may have shocked some people then, but residents of ABLA told a different story. According to a 1987 article by Steve Bogira published in the Chicago Reader, people had been breaking into apartments via medicine cabinets for over a year prior to McCoy's murder. 2 men would later be arrested for the break-in, burglary, and murder, but they were found not guilty in court. Perhaps the case of Ruthie Mae McCoy would have been forgotten had Candyman not hit theaters a few years later. Not only did the film feature similar details to her murder, such as the Chicago project's setting and duplicitous bathroom mirrors, one of its characters bore the McCoy surname. With the new Candyman film set to premiere in summer 2021, as well as another protagonist with the last name of McCoy, it looks like the real-life case of Ruthie Mae McCoy will live on in our collective memory. The story of Ruthie Mae McCoy highlights the stark reality of neglect faced by many marginalized individuals, especially those suffering from mental illness. Despite her repeated calls for help, the authorities failed to act in a timely manner, and the resulting tragedy became a part of the haunting narrative of Chicago's housing system. The ABLA Homes complex, where Ruthie Mae lived, was known for its high crime rates and poor living conditions, which made residents vulnerable to both criminal activity and neglect by public officials. These issues were reflected in the handling of McCoy's case, where the Chicago Police Department showed a disturbing lack of urgency despite clear signs of an ongoing break-in and violent attack. McCoy's tragic story is made even more poignant by the way society failed to recognize the humanity of a woman struggling with mental illness and poverty. It underscores the dehumanization often faced by individuals living in public housing or those who are economically disadvantaged. Her story remains a symbol of how the most vulnerable members of society are often left without protection or justice. Many believe that Ruthie Mae McCoy's tragic murder played a role in the development of the Candyman myth, which served as a metaphor for the urban decay, racial issues, and socio-economic struggles faced by residents of Chicago's public housing. The idea of the Candyman, a figure who haunts the projects and the bathroom mirrors, emerged as a horrifying reflection of real-life fears and tragedies. As we come to the end of Ruthie Mae McCoy's tragic story, it's impossible not to reflect on the haunting reality of what happened. A life lost, a system that failed, and a legacy that lives on, not just in urban legends, but in the lives of those who have suffered similar fates. Ruthie's death, though overlooked at the time, became a symbol of the neglect faced by the most vulnerable members of society. While Candyman's haunting presence may be fiction, the story that inspired it is far too real, and the darkness that surrounded Ruthie's life serves as a reminder of the injustices that still echo through the streets of forgotten neighborhoods. As we close, remember that the real monsters aren't always supernatural. They can be the indifference and neglect that allowed tragedies like this to unfold in the first place. And just like Ruthie's story, the truth often hides in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for watching, and always question what lies beneath the surface.